Everyone good? Great. Thank you for coming out today. Today we're going to release the body-worn camera video from the officer-involved shooting that happened on September 16th in Reston. We're going to show the video, and then immediately following, Chief Davis will come out to provide remarks and answer any questions you may have.
At approximately 10:03 a.m. on September 16th, officers from the Reston District Station responded to a residence in the 11,800 block of Sunrise Valley Drive in Reston. A mental health professional requested officers conduct a welfare check on 33-year-old Sydney Wilson out of concern that she was in an agitated state. A crisis intervention trained officer was the first to arrive on scene at approximately 10:07 a.m. The officer knocked on the door and Wilson answered. He identified himself and Wilson immediately closed the door.
Hi man, I'm Officer Lou.
The officer continued to knock for 2 minutes and 45 seconds, explaining to Wilson that he wanted to check on her welfare. During this time, Wilson placed her phone next to the door with music playing. At approximately 10:17 a.m., Ms. Wilson opened the door and immediately assaulted the officer with a knife.
How are you?
Oh, Jesus Christ. Back up! No!
Oh yeah!
Back up!
Oh yeah!
The officer tried to de-escalate the situation by giving verbal commands and retreating from Wilson. While doing so, he backed up into a dead-end hallway. Wilson continued to move toward the officer, attacking him with the knife.
Oh yeah!
Hey man, I can ask what they're doing. Please back up.
Oh yeah!
Back up!
Oh, yeah.
Back up! Back up! Back up!
Wilson attacked the officer and continued to assault him, striking him in the head. The officer attempted to reposition himself away and discharged his firearm, striking Wilson 3 times.
Five to the one, bubble. Single one. Shots fire.
What is your location?
Star medic, please. The suspect's down. I need medical too.
Units are out, step it open, fire department is en route.
Additional officers rendered first aid and administered blood to Wilson until fire and rescue personnel arrived on scene. Wilson was taken to a nearby hospital where she was pronounced deceased. The officer was transported to an area hospital with non-life-threatening injuries.
Are you okay? Are you okay? Okay. Do you have any other injuries?
Do you have any other gloves?
I don't have any other gloves.
Get rescue in here. You have them. And CB41 have fire department come inside. Take care of him. Take care of him. I got it.
Okay. Hey, do you have any injuries on you other than your face?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Was that the knife she had?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for covering this. As I believe at least Fairfax County community is aware of by now, we've had a release policy for about 3 years or so now. So following a critical event that's captured on body-worn camera, most likely or most often those are officer-involved shootings, but there are other critical events that we've shared with our community. So our policy to release video footage, in this case, body-worn camera video footage within 30 days is something we're really proud of. A lot of other police departments from across the nation contact us and they emulate our release policy because it's the right thing to do for the community. It's the right thing to do for those community members involved in critical incidents like this, and it's the right thing to do, quite frankly, for police officers. So I'll start off by saying that any loss of life is something that we all mourn, and the person whose life was lost in this particular case is no different. She has a family and friends and loved ones who love her very much, who care about her, and undoubtedly are grieving and upset. And we acknowledge that, and we pray, and our thoughts are with this particular family. The last time Fairfax County rather, had an officer-involved shooting was 494 days before this one. So we went about 16 and a half months in Fairfax County without an officer-involved shooting. Our last one, you may recall, was quite dramatic. It's when our uniformed police officer in a marked car was abducted, thrown in his own police car, and taken from one business location to another. So it's been a while since we've had one in Fairfax County, and why is that? Everyone wants to know what the magic formula is, what the magic pill is. There's a lot of factors, probably too many to name, but we're committed to training. We adopted as an agency a couple years ago ICAT training, integrating communications assessments and tactics that build upon our already existing de-escalation and diffusion training. We think ICAT certainly makes a difference. We also have an internal training program called the Priorities of Life. So we've been really thoughtful and intentional when it comes to introducing training to our already very well-trained police department, and we think that's certainly made a difference. Another thing that we've committed to as a county, not just a police department, but as a county government, and it started with the Board of Supervisors back in 2021, is a commitment to a co-responder program. And what a co-responder program normally looks like here and elsewhere is the introduction of a clinician inside of a police car with a police officer, and they're occasionally routinely dispatched to calls for service that are obviously involving a person in a mental or behavioral health crisis, and or they hear a call and they're suspicious about the nature of it, and they suspect it may be someone experiencing a mental or behavioral health crisis, and they self-dispatch. So that started as a pilot in Fairfax County in 2021. In calendar year 2023, our co-responder teams, and we have 4 co-responder teams, our co-responder teams responded to just under 2,000 calls for service. In 2024, year to date, there are already well over 2,200 calls for service. So our CIT teams are being dispatched, they're self-deploying, and they're being used throughout Fairfax County, and we believe that results in better outcomes for persons involved in mental and behavioral health crisis, and we believe it results in better and safer outcomes for our police officers. Speaking of our police officers, the Commonwealth of Virginia, the DCJS mandates that police departments throughout the Commonwealth, I think 254 or so, minimally train about 20% of their agencies, their officers on their agencies, in a 40-hour, pretty detailed, robust, and challenging crisis intervention training program. So the standard across the Commonwealth of Virginia is to have 20% of a police department trained. In Fairfax County, we have 59% of our sworn police officers who are CIT trained. The officer who responded and was dispatched to this check on the welfare call for service was in fact CIT trained. This call went out in essence as a check on the welfare call for service. So, what's a check on the welfare call for service? It's family, friends, and in this case, a health practitioner calls 911, describes a particular circumstance of a person at a location, normally a residence, and they want us, first responders, police, to go check on their welfare, check on their well-being, and make sure everything is okay. We do that a lot. Not only we, but law enforcement in general responds to a lot of check on the welfare calls for service. And between September of 2023 and September of 2024, we responded to 3,252 check on the welfare type calls for service. So it is a routine call, or routinely dispatched rather. It's a routinely dispatched call for service in Fairfax County and elsewhere. So between 2021, when our co-responder program started in earnest with a pilot, and today our co-responder teams have responded to over 5,000 calls for service, mostly in 2023 and 2024. Now, this particular call for service was a co-responder team available. They were working, but they were on their way to another call for service. So the question then begs from everyone is, was this call for service most appropriately, or with the benefit of hindsight, would it have been most appropriately handled by a co-responder team? And there's certainly been some judgment out there, but it's easier to judge than it is to think. And the more I think and review this particular circumstance, I believe that if a co-responder were standing at the doorway with this veteran police officer and the scenario was the same, and you heard our CIT trained officer communicating with a great deal of empathy to the person who was ultimately involved in this officer-involved shooting, I believe personally, and based on my training and everything I've seen and my knowledge of how our co-responder teams operate and the proximity of our clinicians with our officers when they're dealing with people who are in crisis, I believe a co-responder would have found herself or himself in a very dangerous position when this woman came to the door the second time. I think that's something to think about. We're always concerned, and we engage in training and conversations and dialogue with our clinicians, the need for them to really be careful, because if we can't protect our clinicians, then the whole co-responder program is ultimately potentially in jeopardy. So those are my personal thoughts about would a co-responder have, quote unquote, made a difference. I'm not too sure that it would have. I do believe this call for service was appropriately dispatched, and I believe it was appropriately dispatched to a police officer with the training and the experience to handle it effectively. And in fact, I believe he was doing his very best to communicate with this woman before she came to the door a second time with a knife. And you saw the body-worn camera footage. She was immediately, the second time she came to the door, she immediately attacked and slashed our police officer. It could have been much worse. The slash wound he received was at the top of his forehead. You saw he bled a lot. Hopefully what else you saw was our officer tactically repositioning himself or retreating. The body-worn camera video, it's kind of distorting. The distance is distorted with all cameras. But our police officer literally retreats, backs up, and runs backwards as he's pleading with this woman to stop. And he finds himself in a position where he can't back up any more than he already has backed up because his back is against the door of a closed apartment dwelling. So he did the things that we train him and expect him to do. If you're threatened like that, if you can tactically reposition yourself, do it. If you can use distance, use it. If you can seek cover and concealment, seek it. All those options just weren't available to him, and he was being simultaneously attacked with a woman who was now not only slashing the knife from a right to left fashion, and left to right too, but she was stabbing at him with the knife. So that's when he discharged his firearm, and she died, was pronounced dead at a local hospital. What you'll also see, our officer was clearly traumatized by being physically attacked, and you saw where he was in the camera footage. But what else? Another thing I think you see, if you didn't see it the first time, we're going to share this video with you, is a plainclothes detective sergeant, right, who got to the scene and immediately started CPR. You hear the detective sergeant ask if anyone had gloves. No one did, but regardless, and in spite of that, he started CPR right away. We also, and this is something that I don't know made the footage that we shared with you, but we carry whole blood now. Fairfax County police officers, our aviation section carries whole blood, and we started to administer, along with fire and rescue, some whole blood to the person who was shot. So a very chaotic scene. It's certainly disturbing to watch, and I am very grateful that our police officer is recovering, alive and available to still do this very difficult job, and under very difficult circumstances. I believe he did an excellent job attempting to diffuse the situation, attempting to retreat from it and alter its outcome, but he was just in a no-win position and his life was being threatened. I'll take Matt.
You mentioned how he kind of gave a great deal of empathy. Are you surprised by, I guess, how long he took to pull out his gun, especially after the first attack when she came out the door?
I don't know that I'm surprised, and I would have to watch it again and paying particular attention to that. But as he was communicating with her from behind a closed apartment door, I wouldn't necessarily expect him to have his firearm out of its holster at the ready necessarily. There might be circumstances that would dictate that an officer do that, but I think given the particular circumstances and the fact that it wasn't necessarily a heightened scenario while he was knocking on the door, I think the fact that his gun was still in his holster while he was attempting to communicate with her is probably consistent with our training, absent other circumstances. But when she came to the door the second time and attacked him with the knife, I think he rather quickly, I can't give you seconds, but I think he rather quickly unholstered his firearm, and that's when he fired the initial shots when he was being attacked. Paul?
At the scene that day, you told us that this woman had been on the street the day before, agitated, yelling at people. And I know that day, the day of the shooting, it was a mental health provider in Prince William County, I think, that called. Is there a criticism here for not getting enough information from that mental health provider and to the officer? Was there something that was missing there, that there might have been a propensity for violence from this woman?
So the information, Paul, and thank you for that question, and it's certainly a circumstance or circumstances that we ponder and critique as well, but the fact that the woman was out making contact with other persons the day before was something we learned after this incident while still at the scene. So we didn't know it beforehand. The fact that a call for service came in from a healthcare provider is not necessarily unusual. And I think the facts that were communicated from the healthcare provider to first the Prince William County Police Department, their 911, and then relayed to us, were detailed enough to describe the woman as potentially in an agitated state. An agitated state, Paul, as you know in your decades of coverage, can mean many, many different things. And it doesn't necessarily mean that someone's in mental or behavioral health crisis just because they're being described as a person in an agitated state. But like any scenario, this one is no different. We review all the circumstances from the 911 call taker to the dispatcher to the police officer. And there are inevitably, undoubtedly, going to be some constructive training takeaways that we have from this scenario. But I think given what we knew, when we knew it, and how we knew it, I don't see anything glaring that sticks out to me in terms of a big FCPD miss.
And then if you say that you're fortunate that the co-responder wasn't there, but yet these co-responders are going on all these calls all the time where you don't really know what's going to happen. Have you looked into making changes in how you approach a door because of this scenario here?
Yeah. Well, Paul, tomorrow I'm going to Boston for the annual Major Cities Chiefs Association meeting. And for the last several years, and I'm sure this year will be no different, there's going to be a big conversation about co-responders. Are we doing it right? Are there things we need to adjust? I would venture to say, Paul, maybe after you and I are long gone, that there's going to be a real-time streaming component that will be able to introduce mental health professionals, clinicians to scenes virtually or through iPads or through other ways of communication. I think that's the future. But in the meantime, we always talk about police chiefs and police leaders, and many in this room, we always talk about the necessity to ensure our co-responders are up close and personal enough to a scenario to see it and be helpful, but not necessarily in a place where they could find themselves immediately in harm's way. But those two things aren't always mutually exclusive. Clinicians absolutely expose themselves to an element of danger anytime they get out of that police car and go up to a door or a scene or a crash or an outdoor scenario with a police officer, and there's an element of risk associated with it.
Chief, can you speak to just how quickly the circumstances in the situation in this particular case changed in a snap of a finger, a drop of a hat? This goes from being a welfare check to something that's an incredibly dangerous situation for this particular officer. Can you just walk us through what's going through an officer's mind?
Yeah. Well, Randy, well, thank you for that question. I've knocked on many doors throughout my career, and the vast majority of the time, those doors are answered by someone, and that person's not always necessarily happy to see us, or maybe agitated in one way, shape, or another, but it can change. It can go from 0 to 60 quite quickly. And you see, when she first came to the door, she said something. I don't recall exactly what she said, but maybe it was inaudible. And then she closes the door. Now, folks might say, well, why'd you keep knocking on the door? Well, we're tasked with knocking on the door. It's our responsibility to make sure she's okay. We just can't turn our back and walk away from it if she's in a position that we don't know if she's a danger to herself or others. So the fact that we kept knocking is consistent with our training, our profession's expectations. But just because someone comes to the door, opens it, and closes it, doesn't automatically make it a barricade situation or a heightened situation. We try to resolve it at the lowest level. But he kept knocking for over 2 minutes, and when she came to the door, I'm not speaking for our officer, but I'm sure he was absolutely shocked to be confronted with a knife. And thanks to his training and experience, I do think he was able to react to it in real time very quickly. And his reaction to it, his proper reaction, I think saved his life. Dick?
Chief, could you update us on the investigations and the timeline for the investigations?
So, regarding this officer-involved shooting, Dick?
Yes, sir.
So as you know, it'll be a dual investigation inside the walls of the FCPD. There'll be an administrative investigation that's ongoing, and then there's a criminal investigation that ultimately gets reviewed by Mr. Descano and his office at the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office. So those are moving along as they normally do. In the meantime, the officer is on restricted duty, and he's serving elsewhere within the police department as the investigation unfolds, and as we continue to check on him, because he's been through quite a dramatic circumstance, and we have a world-class health and wellness program inside the police department, so they're working with him as well. So all those things, all three of those balls are in the air at the same time. And the fourth ball maybe that's in the air is we're always looking at circumstances like this to determine if we can create an environment, whether it's training or policy, that can keep police officers and those we interact with in the community safer.
Can you
Matt?
answer off-topic questions?
No. Yes, I can.
The department released a press release regarding a teacher, David Scalia, from Langley High School, regarding openly masturbating campus.
Yeah, that's disturbing. It was recorded, I think, by a student inside the classroom, passed along to us. We've been working hand in glove with FCPS the entire way. He's been criminally charged. I think he's 40 years old, charged with some very serious and disturbing crimes. But like we always do, we work very well with Fairfax County Public Schools. Dr. Reed and her team are first class. And I believe as of a couple hours ago, he was still being held at the Adult Detention Center on a no-bond status.
So a student was recording him doing this?
I believe that's how we became aware initially that this overt act was occurring inside of a classroom.
I hate to even ask this. Was he just was watching anything? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure of those exact details, and a lot of those will probably play out inside of a courtroom, but we have an abundance of probable cause to believe, and rather to know, that he was masturbating inside of a classroom with a student present, and Yeah, very, very serious, and we take it seriously. And thankfully, we've been able to charge him before he graduates to an even more serious crime.
This was during class period. Off.
No, it was during the school day, correct. Anybody else? All right, have a good week.
Thank you all for coming out today. We will be posting the press release and the links to this video on our blog. You can find it there, and we'll be posting links to it as well on our social media at Fairfax County PD. Thanks so much.